President Trump is trying to turn the Strait of Hormuz into a pressure point for Iran. Iran's move to choke off many shipments from the Persian Gulf states, now triggering the worst energy crisis since the 70s. Trump now plans a blockade set to start in less than an hour, and it appears to be his attempt to turn the tables.
Without being able to export its oil, its economy is already in tatters. This is the maximum pressure. The bombing, although terrible, will not increase the did not and would not increase the pressure on Iran as much as this will.
Trump is accusing Iran of lying when it agreed to reopen the strait under the ceasefire deal. The U.S. military says the blockade will begin in about 40 minutes' time and has sent out a message that any vessels attempting to sail to or from Iranian ports will be stopped and potentially captured. Now, blockades, naval blockades, are complex and can be risky. We've asked retired Vice-Admiral Mark Norman of the Royal Canadian Navy to join us. He's now a fellow with the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. Mark, good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning, David.
How do you do a blockade? It appeared, I will just preface this by saying it appears that the Americans are primarily going to do it in the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea, very wide bodies of water. How do you do it there?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, to your point, it makes sense that they would do this outside of the straits themselves, primarily for their own force protection. And there is still a significant threat of mines and surface and missiles and drones if they were to enter the Gulf. But with that said, to your question, basically what they're going to have to do here is they're going to have to establish patrol areas outside of the Gulf to intercept, interdict vessels that are trying to enter the strait. And that'll involve having a number of surface vessels, long-range patrol aircraft, likely a whole series of helicopters. And they'll just basically coordinate searches. They'll use available information that the ships are required to broadcast digitally so that they know who's coming from where. And then obviously they would do the same thing for any vessels that are attempting to leave the straits. That's how you figure out what to do. Then the question becomes, how do you actually intercept these vessels? And I think, that's a significant challenge. It's not like you're going to put a destroyer necessarily in front of a 200,000-ton oil tanker. You're certainly not going to shoot at it with missiles or guns or anything like that. You may try to fire some warning shots to convince the master to stop the vessel. But I think if they get themselves where they actually have to stop these vessels, we're going to see the kind of thing that we saw a few months ago in the Gulf of Mexico with the embargo of Venezuelan ships, where they're going to have to use aircraft, helicopters, and probably board the vessels and seize them. And that gets pretty dicey, especially if any of those vessels are flagged as Chinese, for example.
Well, we've been talking about that very thing over the course of the morning. What would happen diplomatically if U.S. Marines were to be dropped by rope from a helicopter onto the deck of an oil tanker owned by a Chinese firm and crewed by Chinese nationals?
Yeah, well, from an international law of the sea perspective, we're into very serious escalation here. I mean, the act of a blockade itself, although the blockade is against Iran, that is an act of war. So if there was any ambiguity in the debate about whether the U.S. was engaged in war or not, as soon as you blockade a country, that is under international law an overt act of war. Now, to board and seize a vessel of another flagged nation, that is right up against the line of a similar act of war. And the Chinese will not take kindly to this. And I think the U.S. have got themselves into a bit of a sticky wicket, as the Brits would say.
But the point of this is to put pressure on Iran to come back to the table, to agree to what the Americans want them to agree to in terms of a permanent truce. The pressure point is that if they can get even one ship to stop, that's hundreds of millions of dollars worth of potential revenue for the Iranians. And will some ships just stay away?
Yeah, well, I think to your point, and to Dr. Stein, your previous guest, she made that point quite effectively. This is really the only significant remaining pressure point or point of leverage that the United States has. This is all about money at the end of the day. I think if the Americans play this smart, the Chinese could actually help them put some pressure onto the Iranians, because of course it's in the Chinese interest to keep that oil flowing, as it is other countries. But yeah, I mean, this is a somewhat desperate act. There is some undeniable irony in the fact that we are now going to blockade a strait that we've wanted to open since the conflict started. I'm concerned both operationally in terms of how this is going to unfold, but I'm not convinced strategically that it's necessarily the best solution. But I think the U.S. have painted themselves into a bit of a corner here.
Last question. I've only got a few seconds with you, Mark Norman. Does the U.S. Navy have enough ships in the region to actually do this job?
It'll be tight. They may have to divert some ships from other areas. They're certainly capable of doing it. If the volume's not too high, I think they can do it with what they have. But it's going to come at a cost, and that means that they won't be able to do other things that they should otherwise be doing.
Mark Norman, as always, very much appreciate your time. Thank you.